Hi everybody, welcome back to the garage. Today's project is our Triumph TR6 gearbox. Well, not ours, it's somebody else's, but I'm helping out. There is an issue with the clutch, so if you are having trouble shifting into gears, if you're stepping on the clutch, you're not able to get it into gear, you can adjust the clutch slave cylinder. Don't do that. I'm going to show you what the problem very likely is to be. We'll kind of go from there. But first, let me take you through kind of how the clutch operates on this. When you step on the pedal, what you're doing is you're sending hydraulic fluid from the master cylinder down to the slave cylinder, which pushes on a rod and pushes back this lever. And you can see what's moving on the inside is that it is forcing this, this is your throwout bearing back and forth. So when you step on the clutch, forces the throwout bearing forward. That puts pressure on the clutch, causes it to activate, and that's how it works. And so a common problem is that you're finding you're not getting enough travel in the clutch, and so people will use a different hole on here, and it's really kind of a band-aid. It's not going to be a good long-term solution. You generally shouldn't have to do it. It's not a bad factory alignment. Something is actually broken. So check your hydraulics first, because for those you don't actually have to pull the gearbox out. Make sure that you don't have a leak. Try bleeding it. But if you've already gone through that and the master and slave and the hose are not it, don't bother adjusting the clutch operating lever. The problem is different. Now, I've already taken this one apart, so I'm going to kind of undo it by hand here just so you can see what's going on. But the issue is this pin. Most often, I should say, the issue is this pin. And for those of you that know what the pin is supposed to look like, you will recognize that there is another piece to it, and it shears off. And so let me show you the operation of this. If you're taking it apart, just pull out that pin. You may have safety wire to clip off first. So you basically just pull out the shaft. This comes right off, and the pin is threaded in through there. It goes through this hole. So let me show you this a little bit closer here. And here's basically what you're doing. You take the pin out. Again, there was safety wire on this. They did that from the factory. Just cut the safety wire, undo the pin. It's normal threads. Wiggle the shaft out, and then you can get it into its individual components. A couple of things could happen. So very common, this pin will shear. If the pin shears, then it allows the shaft to rotate slightly before it starts dragging this clutch operating fork forward. And so if that's happening, you are not getting your complete clutch travel, and that is very likely why your clutch isn't operating. The other thing that it could be is pay attention to these pins. And these are actually in pretty decent shape, but sometimes they wear a flat spot. You can see where there's wear, but it's not actually too bad on these. There will be a flat spot on these pins. And again, you're not getting the complete clutch travel if you see that. If that's happened, I mean, you basically have to get these out. They're kind of pressed into place and then hammered so that there's a riveted side. So, I mean, the only real way to get it out is you kind of have to machine this down, punch it out the other way, get a new piece. At least I believe that's how it is. It's been a while since I've done that. Also, on your throwout bearing, the carrier that it's on. So this front piece that I've got in my hand here is the throwout bearing itself, but it's pressed onto this carrier, which looks like it's in pretty reasonable shape. But sometimes you'll see that it will have worn a recess in the carrier, and if that's the case, again, this is operating by pressing it forward. There we go. I'm trying to get my bearings here. Pressing it forward towards the car, and so if you've got flat spots on these pegs, if your release bearing carrier has rounded bits worn into it, it's not going to work. You're not getting your full travel. And so very often a combination of these, but my first thought is if you're not getting full clutch travel, this pin has probably sheared just like this one. I have found that you can buy a brand new clutch operating shaft and a high strength pin, And rather than mess around with trying to just reassemble the components, the pin's only a few bucks. The shaft is actually about $18. It's remarkable just how inexpensive it is. And this one we're going to be replacing. It's just a spring. This one we're going to be replacing because you can see there's a groove that's worn into it. The bushings on the gearbox are replaceable. You can get those out and have new ones installed. But the bushings are actually in good shape in this gearbox. I don't like how this is worn in. Again, it's going to reduce travel. I don't like how there's some defects in the metal. I don't like how this has kind of sharp edges as I'm running my thumb over it. So probably best to just replace this shaft at the same time. We'll get everything cleaned up, put it back in, and presto, the clutch will once again work. Okay, here's how it's going to go together. You need to put this through the gearbox first. This needs to be on the release bearing. And you need to make sure your pin, it's a taper pin, so it's only going to go one direction, but you need to make sure that goes in the other way and that it threads in cleanly. If it doesn't thread in cleanly, I would get a thread chaser and make sure that your threads are clean. This is a new pin, and then you'll want to safety wire it. Now the problem is that, again, like I pointed out, this is a very common thing to break. And so what we're going to do is we're gonna thread in the pin to make sure that it's located properly. But then I'm going to put this, I'm going to drill a hole through the center of this, going straight through the shaft. The shafts aren't that expensive, so actually it's not a big deal, even if you get it wrong, but I mean, we won't get it wrong. But if you drill a hole through the center and then put in a bolt that is maybe 1,000th or a couple thousandths larger than the hole, it'll be a press fit. You'll press the bolt through. And if you use a bolt with a 7/16 head, so I guess it's probably what, a 1/4 inch bolt. If you put that through the center of the shaft, you will have the taper pin and a 1/4 inch bolt both doing the same job. It splits the load in half, roughly, and it will prevent the amount of stress that you have on this pin, because TR6 clutches tend to have a lot of force that goes back, and so it's generating all sorts of torques, and that's why it breaks. So a secondary bolt is kind of a good backup. The other thing that I would probably recommend, if you don't feel like doing that, that's okay, but every time you have the clutch out in a TR6, throw this pin away, get a new one, inspect the quality of the shaft. If it's starting to get worn, get a new one. Check on these pins. Again, this is all part of clutch maintenance on a TR6, so it's just something you want to make sure that you're doing. All right, I've lost my cutting oil, but that's okay. We're just chasing threads, so a little bit of oil is a good idea, though, on your tool. I do not know if these are all the same. I believe they are, but this is 7/16 by 20. It's a pretty standard size. And just go slow. You want to make sure it's going in straight. Every couple of turns, turn it back out a half turn or so. It's already probably far enough. But always test fit the bolt. Much nicer. Okay. Here we go. When you do go to assemble this, some Loctite on the threads is a good idea. Or, like what I'm going to do, I'm going to get safety wire through here. and just wire it to this shaft to make sure that it can't undo itself. When you're done, check the fit. It should be a tight fit when it gets to this shank. The threads might go through. And yeah, as long as it's perfect. So what we'll do is we'll assemble it. We'll tap the bolt through with a hammer. I am going to shorten these threads slightly so that it doesn't stick out too far on the other side. We will use a couple of washers, a lock nut, and just for some added security, we're going to use some Loctite on top of that. And let's reassemble this. Your spring on your new shaft. Part of the reason, by the way, you don't want to go with a larger hole is that it could weaken the integrity of the shaft as a whole. So it's just something to keep in mind. There we go. Okay. Operation of the clutch, and then let's get some safety wire. If you use safety wire, just fold it back out of the way so it doesn't hit anything spinning. Once again, just check for smooth operation. I think that's going to be much better. All right, that's pretty much it, guys. We've got, that's the main bolt. We've safety wired it so it's not going to twist itself out. And then I've got the backup, so that between the two of those it ought to split the load. The clutch should operate just fine. Basically I'm just going to wash this down, put in some new fluid, and we'll get it back in the car. So thanks for watching. If you've got questions, let me know. Hopefully this is helpful. And if you haven't already, obviously like, subscribe, all that kind of fun stuff. And I'll see you next time.